In 2019, I read 53 books, and if you stick around, I'll tell you which ones were my favorite. Hello readers! This is coming at you a little bit late, but I figured people might still be interested in my fave for 2019. These are in no particular order, but I am sharing books that are mostly 5-star with a couple of 4 stars mixed in. First is 99% Mine by Sally Thorne. She is also the author of The Hating Game. This was an adult contemporary romance. It was a friends to lovers romance, and I think the beginning was a little bit difficult to get into, but eventually it picks up and I really enjoyed it. If you're not familiar with Sally Thorne, I would say read 99% Mine first and then move on to The Hating Game. A lot of people have said that they liked The Hating Game more. And so I think if you read 99% Mine, you get to enjoy it, and then like The Hating Game could be like the cherry on top. But really, I think it would be worth comparing what kind of gets you hyped up, whether that's friends to lovers or a love to hate romance. So it's going to be different for each person. But again, I really loved both of these books. I think Sally Thorne does a good job creating tension between her characters and her romances. And so, like, I was squealing while I was reading it. I was actually buddy reading this with Yessie from the book Vagrant, and we were just going back and forth, and we were like really excited as the whole thing was developing. I don't want to say too much more about it because I did review it, so I'll be sure to link to that video in the description below. The second book is actually a short story, and it's Evidence of the Affair by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This short story is told in letters, and so those letters are coming from 2 different perspectives. Let me see if I can explain this. A woman writes to a man who is married to another woman who she thinks her husband is cheating on her with. Kind of confusing. But what I loved so much about this short story was how quickly I got invested in it and how well it is told with these letters going back and forth. It's a really quick read. I thought the ending was great. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I think it really just shows off Taylor Jenkins Reid's chops. And if you haven't read anything by her, which I kind of can't imagine at this point, but if you haven't, that would be a great place to start. Book number 3 is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I listened to the audiobook for this, and I would recommend it because it has a full cast. Daisy is actually played by Jennifer Beals, who was the actress in Flashdance. I don't know why I got giddy about that, but I did. So a full cast, and the book is about a 70s band, and it's kind of documentary style, and it tells the story of how they came together and then how they eventually broke up. So you can tell that they're being interviewed, and each person from the band is telling their part of the story, and they're kind of like all mixed in different ways. But I thought it was great. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I would strongly recommend it. I'm also super excited that they're making a TV show out of it. I don't remember what network it is. I don't know. I think it was Amazon that had picked it up. I was a little surprised that they picked it up before The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, but I would love to see Daisy Jones and the Six on screen because it just feels so real. As you're reading through it, you're gonna ask yourself, are these real people? Is this a real band? Like, Taylor Jenkins Reid just has this way of writing celebrities that they sound so real. Book number 4 is How to Start a Revolution by Lauren Duca. I found How to Start a Revolution so informative, but what I loved is how Lauren starts with her story in regards to her family and how they had opposing political views. She very honestly talks about some of the struggles that they had and how it affected holidays, but also how they, continue to love each other through that and how they worked through some of those things. But she breaks down how important it is to practice good citizenship and how young people are intentionally alienated from the conversation. And it's completely on purpose because the people in power don't want young people making the decisions. They don't want change. They don't want certain things to happen. And when people don't feel like they're being spoken to and they're not connecting to what's happening, they're less likely to go out and and vote or volunteer or do a lot of other things. But she does talk about everyone's political awakening that seems to be happening right now for reasons. I found it to be really hopeful, and she explains what kind of steps we should be taking to be more engaged and to start changing things so that government reflects us and what we want it to be and the kind of action it takes for that to be possible. I loved How to Start a Revolution so much that I actually bought 3 copies and I gave them away to people on Twitter. Definitely check it out. If you enjoy it, gift it to someone that you think might appreciate it. It was written in a language that I think will really speak to young people, and it was just really good. The 5th book is another short story. It's called The Last Conversation by Paul Tremblay, and it was an Amazon original. Once again, I listened to the audiobook and I felt like I had such a sense of unease and suspense while I was reading it. Basically, it's told in second person, which is a little weird, but it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable. I read it and immediately made my husband read it, and then I went to work and I convinced my coworker to read it. It was such a ride for the short hour or hour and a half that the audiobook was. But in the story, you wake up and someone's kind of telling you what to do. You can't fully see, you can't really walk. And so the person speaking to you is guiding you through kind of working out and learning how to walk and all this other stuff. And so each day you have a new set of goals and things that you're trying to learn and accomplish, and you're learning more about yourself. And so throughout the story, you're like, where am I? What is happening? Who is this person that's talking to me? Where did I come from? You know, what's going on? And it was just very suspenseful, and for a short story, I thought it was awesome. Book number 6 is My Absolute Darling by Gabriel Talent. This is a debut novel. It was recommended to me by a friend, and it was a good but very tough read. So I feel like I couldn't not put it on my list because it made me feel many things. Many things. It made me feel disgust. It made me feel anger. It made me feel sad. It made me feel hopeful. It was rough. I think it was very well written and the characters are very believable, but also despite the fact that there was a lot of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily want to see on screen because it was so graphic, it felt like I was watching a movie while I was reading it. It was just that vivid and that emotional. I actually read this book while I was on one of my retreats. So my friend Kat from For the Love of Books kind of saw me reading it, and there were times where I like inhaled or sighed or had to close my eyes or put the book down. She was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, this book, and I had to take a breather and go get a snack and then come back. And you know, it got to the point where she was like, "Why are you reading this? Why are you reading this?" And again, it was recommended by a friend, and I felt like I needed to read it. I had already been invested in the story, and I think it was a worthwhile read. But I also want to say, don't just randomly pick this book up. Like, all the trigger warnings. I can't possibly go through all of them, but if you're even like slightly interested, then please make sure that you look up all the trigger warnings. There was definitely violence, there was assault, there was sexual assault, there was death and gore, and it was pretty rough. There was a lot of misogyny. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I feel like it's a story that's going to stick with me for a very long time. I don't know if I'll ever get to a point where I want to reread it, but I'm not going to forget it. I don't even know if I can accurately summarize it, but I guess I'll try. It's about a girl who's named Turtle. That's not really her real name, but that's what she's called throughout the book. And her and her dad kind of live somewhere out in the country in California somewhere. It's basically just her and her dad living in this trashy house, and it sounds like they don't have much, and her dad is a very smart person, but he also is like waiting for the end of times. He's a survivalist, and he teaches her to do survivally things. So he has taught her how to hunt and how to, cook out in the wilderness and how to shoot different types of guns. And everything is like a training for her. So sometimes he brings her into the house and he makes her pretend like there's a stranger in the house and she has to go from room to room and do all these things. And he is a misogynistic person, so that rubs off on her, and it's not a good situation for her as a child at all. And the entire story is about what happens as she starts to get older and she starts to question what she's been taught her whole life and who her dad is and what he means to her. But again, if you are sensitive to any topics, please double check what the triggers are for that book. Like, I want to be really responsible, just let you know that it's like the first chapter is messed up. It starts that early on. So it's definitely a polarizing book. I'm sure the reviews are all over the place. So do your research. Book number 7 might come as a surprise to a lot of people. I think it kind of comes as a surprise to me. But it's Batman Nightwalker by Marie Lu. I read this with the Once Upon a Read Along book club that is now known as the BookTube Jigs book club. I gave it 4 stars, and I thought it was an interesting romance, but what it really captured for me was all the different shades of gray in life. It wasn't black and white. It was very psychologically complicated. I know I did see complaints somewhere where people like, why is it even called Batman? Because you don't really get to see Batman. It's really Bruce before he becomes Batman. It's been quite a while since I read it, so the details are a little bit fuzzy, but there was a chick who was a criminal. She ended up being put in jail or in some kind of asylum, and he wanted to know more about her. He wanted to get closer to her, and he started doing janitorial stuff just so that he can talk with her, and they started building a relationship. And so the whole time you're like, is she playing him? Is she manipulating him? What's happening? Like, are they really developing feelings for each other? And I think it goes to show that not everyone is evil, and there's no such thing as like a solely evil person. People usually have their reasons for doing things. Now, I haven't really read any Batman comics, and I haven't even watched too many of the Batman movies, so that's coming from someone who kind of has a blank slate in regards to Batman. So I wasn't comparing it to anything. That may have been why I enjoyed it so much, but I just liked the way the story was told. I liked kind of seeing who Bruce Wayne was before he was Batman, and again, those shades of gray just felt very lifelike and meaningful. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Book number 8 is The Burning World by Isaac Marion, and it is the second book in the Warm Bodies series. There were a lot of parallels to today's political climate, which was completely unintentional. The author has mentioned that before, but the way things line up with what's happening now are pretty intense. I really love Isaac Marion's writing. It's poetic and lyrical, and sometimes he says things that just kind of punch you in the heart or in the gut, and continuing the story was exciting. If you haven't read Warm Bodies yet, then obviously you should start there. There was a little bit of a difference I felt in tone from Warm Bodies to The Burning World. I think in The Burning World it's a lot less focused on the romance and more about what's happening in the world and how this zombie apocalypse happened. Book number 9 was The Joy of Missing Out by Tanya Dalton. This was a nonfiction, motivational, get shit done kind of book. There were a few things that I loved about it. One being that it didn't just feel like I was reading a book. From the moment I was provided the ARC, it was an experience. So I was provided the book by the publisher, and normally when I receive an ARC, I have never gotten an author video to accompany it, and that happened here. And I thought that was incredible because I got to see the author's face. She told me why she wrote the book. She just got me really excited for the whole thing. And while reading it, she just provides so many different resources. She has a podcast, she has an email newsletter, and I just felt like she was there every step of the way. The way the book itself is like graphically designed was really, really nice. It felt like there was attention paid to every single part of that book and that book launch, and it was an experience. In the beginning of the book, she really puts into perspective how we spend our time, and that blew my mind a little bit. But the point of the whole book is essentially that you need to know what kinds of things you should be weeding out or missing out on so that you are more productive in your life, but also so that your life is more fulfilling. So you aren't spending all this time doing busy work that's not really helping you achieve your goals, and is just making you spend time away from the things that are really important to you, like family or other really important things. And the final book, book number 10, is Don't Date Rosa Santos by Nina Moreno. And this is a YA contemporary romance with magical realism. I think it reminded me a lot of Jane the Virgin. It's also been compared to the Gilmore Girls, but to me it felt more like Jane the Virgin, with the generational women that are basically these strong women that have their own issues, and they have to figure out how to live with each other and how to love with each other and how to communicate with each other, and sometimes those things don't go great. Rosa's family has this superstition because the grandmother's husband and the mother's husband both died at sea, so they feel like they've been cursed by the sea, and so they don't want Rosa to date anyone that has anything to do with the sea. But they live in a small town near the water, so that becomes a little bit difficult for Rosa to avoid. Rosa is Cuban American, and as a Cuban American reading this felt like home. I live in Florida right now, and I'm unfortunately apart from a lot of my family in New York, and there was just so much in there that resonated with me, that sounded familiar. I just absolutely loved the story, and I loved seeing my culture in a book. Well, that's all I got. Those are my faves for 2019. I do want to give a quick comment or shout out to Melvin Hunter for being the first person to comment on my last video and providing some comment or love. So thank you, Melvin. What are some of your favorite books of 2019? Let me know in the comments below. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when I upload new videos. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.